many a young man or woman that couldn't make it in organic chemistry, I recommended they go down to the business school. And he said years later, some came back to thank me. In other words, they had made plenty of money.
Yes, that's right. That's right. There's no guarantee that one thing will lead to the other, and it doesn't mean that people with money are bad or stupid, but certainly we know that in your day, to be a doctor was a very noble thing and also a very difficult thing to achieve.
Exactly, and you got that respect. But
you deserve the respect. You're talking about, what year did you earn your medical degree in, sir?
72. I started in 68.
Okay, so you're going back to the age of popular culture of Dr. Ben Casey, Dr. Kildare, correct?
Exactly. Ben Casey was one of my favorite shows.
1950s, Ben Casey was a doctor in a hospital, and he was a hero. And he was seen as a flawed hero, but still a hero. He wasn't using drugs behind the scenes as in Nurse Jackie today, for example.
Now, when I applied for medical school, if I'd had a drug arrest, I would have been kicked out. By the time I finished, they had some substance users, medical students that were substance users, and the medical school would have their lawyers try to help them. So that's how things changed.
Well, I knew someone who went into medicine strictly to get access to the drugs. He boasted about it.
A lot of anesthesiologists do that. But
really, I heard there's a high degree of abuse of medications by anesthesiologists.
The other thing.
So, what do you think will happen to medicine as a field in the coming years as Obamacare kicks in?
Well, regrettably, in order to cope with it, physicians will become unionized. You know what I mean? And it'll be a very sorry state.
Also, it'll be a race to the bottom, less qualified people, and more of them from the third world, sort of H-1B visa types who can't speak the language.
Exactly, and
right. You're going to have hospitals flooded with people from third world countries who really are not good doctors, who are simply there to fill prescriptions and do whatever they have to do. That's the sad truth. You know, I want to just say this. When I was growing up, a doctor was revered. One of the top things a young man in my day could have become was a doctor. Very difficult to get into medical school. Even more difficult to complete medical school, never mind getting in. So doctors, rightly so, were looked up to. They made a lot of money, not by today's standards, but they did very well. And they were looked up to. And in the Soviet Union in the 50s, I remember reading, which shocked me, I was stunned by it, that while the doctor was looked up to in America, the doctor was considered below a teacher in the Soviet Union of the 1950s. And I couldn't understand how that worked. But as America is changing more and more to the old Soviet system and becoming more and more communized over the years, I believe the same thing is happening here, where the doctor is going down the scale of respect, down the scale of earning, and becoming almost a more pedestrian profession than teaching. That's where I see it going.
That's the trajectory. I hope it's changed. But
I don't know how can we change it? How can we ever change this? How can we stop this? The young kids don't want to put in the time to become a doctor.
There's still some good people there. I spent a good deal of my career actually teaching, and so I actually made less money. But
no, what I'm saying is, don't most young people today, don't they think they can make a fortune as a web designer or going to work for Google? I mean, they don't want to work. They don't want to put in 8 to 10 years of study to make a living. My friend, Countdown to Mecca goes out to you. It's a novel that an educated man would love reading. I'll be right back.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
My Savage Nation is sponsored by SwissAmerica.com. It's the only company I trust to protect my wealth. Call 800-BUY-COIN. What a Friday this is so far. I feel like I'm swimming through mud. I hope nothing happens. I just do. I hope it's just a quirk in my nature. Cup of tea a day called Healthy for the Heart. That's an old story. You know that doctor who called in the last segment? He had such a calming voice that he reminded me of what was known as bedside manner in my day, which is now reserved for Bruce Jenner, for example. But doctors who were good healers had what was known as a bedside manner, meaning their appearance when you were sick made you feel better. He was a healer. That doctor was a healer, which is why he called me to say I'm not like that other doctor. You understand what? He understood the difference. So he triggered some thinking in my mind. He said the organic chemistry, how hard it was. And I reached in my library of chemistry books. Believe me, I'm no expert in the field. I've studied, I remember a year of pharmacology and this and that. And I got totally caught up in the phytochemistry of bioactive compounds from medicinal plants for 20 years. But I'm no expert in the field. There are people who are just great experts in this field. But from the average listener point of view, when you say, many of you use the word antioxidant, but you don't know what it is. You've heard it's good for you. And you say, well, wow, that's great. So we say, well, I drink tea, or I eat chocolate, or I drink red wine because I hear it's good for me. But why? Well, research says that drinking these things could cut the risk of heart attacks. What's the secret ingredient? It's a class of compounds known as flavonoids. What's a flavonoid? It's a powerful antioxidant. What's an antioxidant? Many of you use the word daily, but you don't know what it is. In simple terms, an antioxidant is a substance that offsets oxygen's damaging effects in the body. And flavonoids also make blood cells less prone to clotting. Now, why would oxygen damage the body? This is something most people can't understand. Don't we need oxygen to live? We do. So why would oxygen on a cellular level need to be antioxidized? Interesting question, isn't it? Go to graduate school and you'll get the answer.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
It is Rock and Roll Friday. We're halfway through the program today on the Savage Nation. So far, the world hasn't come to an end. I guess that's because Obama hasn't gotten up for the day yet. I don't know what he's plotting. It seems like he's always plotting something on a Friday night. So we'll have to wait and see. I know a lot of people watching the basketball game last night. I tried to watch it. I try to be a good American. Some of my most intelligent friends said they're going to watch the basketball game last night. Now, I'm not a sports fan. I'm saying this because I know people who are very intelligent, who are sports fans. I'm not one of them. Well, I watched them throwing the ball around for about 5 minutes and had to turn it off. I just can't get into it. I couldn't watch it. And that doctor's call in the last hour told me why I'm not interested in sports. I remember reading that a good percentage of our medicines today still derive from natural products, meaning come from plants or minerals or whatever, from nature, in other words. That although in the age of synthetic and synthetically derived medicines, about a third of our drugs still derive from nature, which I thought was amazing. Now, in Chinese medicine, this is still largely true. And people who are ignorant in this country like to think that it's all voodoo and witchcraft, and it's easy to dismiss the whole field. But what attracted me when I was very young was the whole story. It was a simple story about how aspirin was discovered. And as I heard it, Bayer aspirin, right? Bayer, the word Bayer, like the number one in the field of aspirin making. Well, I remember when I went to grad school, in the first year I was in pharmacology, my professor, who had been research director at Dow Chemical, had moved to Hawaii to get away from the industrial Midwest. He was the greatest teacher I ever had in my life. One of the great teachers, like that doctor, sounded like him, kind, friendly, didn't try to trap you. So we would talk about, natural products and herbs and shoots. That's how I wound up collecting plants all those years. I was telling you about my herbarium collection, which is 30 feet from me now. It's like an old friend has been found that was locked away in an institution for years. I went and just opened up the herbarium case and saw the plant collection. I remember the day I collected them in the 60s and 70s. So I remember the story of Bayer aspirin. How did it happen? Well, apparently in Germany, a man's father suffered arthritis. And by using the folk remedy of willow bark, they would boil Salix willow bark, and the concoction that arose from the boiling of the willow bark, the drink, the tea, soothed the man's rheumatism and arthritis. Well, the young man was very, very interested in knowing what was in that stuff that enabled his father not to be crippled with, the pain. And he found that inside that stuff was a chemical structure known as salicin. And he converted it into salicylic acid. It's an acetyl derivative of salicylic acid, by the way, that became aspirin. That's what it was. So in other words, it was derived originally from willow bark, and then he synthesized by converting the basic structure into something else, into aspirin, acetylsalicylic acid. Still one of the greatest drugs ever invented. I use it all the time. I find it to be a miracle for almost everything. It's astounding. I use it as a sedative. If I take an aspirin at night, it's like a sedative for me. It's like a sleeping pill. And it doesn't harm me in any way whatsoever. I've been doing it for years. And I won't use Anacin, and I won't use, if I have pain, I try never to use acetaminophen for the obvious reasons. I try to avoid them like the plague. There may be a better painkiller, but I don't really want to kill my liver at the same time. I just thought I'd tell you the story of the of aspirin, how it came from the bark, and the rest is history. Then he built a whole company called Bayer, and now we have that. And by the way, I remember, never forget, to this day, what my pharmacology professor told me. He said, when you buy aspirin, he said, always buy Bayer. I know, it's funny, they're not an advertiser, I shouldn't say, and none of them advertise on the show. I said, why? He said, because they still make the purest product. And he said, a lot of the knockoffs, they're not as pure. They're filled with impurities. The same is true with medicines today. You notice that when you buy a drug, and they always ask for, what is it called when it's not the original drug, but it's called something else, the derivative or the equivalent, where it's cheaper. I always ask for the original. I have to pay a lot more for the medicine because we don't know. These derivative drugs, generic. You think you're getting the same medicine in a generic drug, you're mistaken. You're not. They're not as good as the pharmacology. The pharmacology is not as pure as that of the original drug in most cases. And secondly, a lot of these generic drugs are made in India, and they're just filled with adulterants. You should know that. There's not an argument to say that you should pay more in general. I'm just telling you that you're getting a better product. I mean, it's like taking a Rolls Royce as opposed to a lesser car. Put it that way. There are differences, in other words, between a manufacturer's patented medicine and a derivative called the equivalent, whatever they call it. I keep forgetting the name for it. A generic product. Now, there are some drugs you cannot get a generic of because they hold a patent. They're not allowed to knock them off. I don't think you can get a Viagra in a derivative. There are none in an equivalent. But the day will come that you're going to get, well, you get a lot of the crap put out now. They call it Viagra, but it isn't. It's a copy. They sell them all over the internet, but they're made in shoddy laboratories all over India mainly. I don't know how the Indians got into that, the shoddy drug business. I can make a general statement that would be a rim shot, but I think I'll avoid it. It'll have something to do with H-1B visas and Microsoft and Facebook, but I won't go there because it wouldn't be fair. What else is in the news? Well, who knows what's in the news? What do you care? WABC Line 7, what's on your mind?
Hi, yes, sir. My name is Chris. I'm from San Diego. And I wanted to talk about, yesterday you brought up a point about how maybe the Israelis and the United States may be working together and that ISIS perhaps was being allowed by them to prosper.
Right, so what's your point? Right, that was my point yesterday. What's your point?
Well, I did a little bit of research, and they are running a pipeline, the Qatar-Turkey pipeline through
Syria. I think a caller mentioned that yesterday, and I brought up the fact that when Bill Clinton bombed Serbia illegally and in a war crime, committing a war crime, it was done to run a pipeline through Kosovo. Similar situation, I think, to what's going on in Syria. They want to run a pipeline through Syria, so they want to take out Assad. And Russia doesn't want the pipeline because it would compete with their oil flow, correct?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I think that this is all very interesting because if you look at Dutch shale oil, their largest, my father worked for a large oil company for a long time, and he said that the reason why they want to start pushing these pipelines is so that they no longer have to ship it through Egypt. Because, believe it or not, to get the majority of the oil, the United States doesn't actually have a lot of oil imported from Saudi Arabia. The major oil importer from Saudi Arabia is Europe, and they have to go through the Suez Canal, and they have to use some pretty big tankers. And what he was saying was that they wanted to destroy American oil. The Saudis want to be able to push it to the point of where we would be absolutely uncompetitive, and that's another...
well, look, the big picture is this. Iran is hours away from sending in troops to Syria, according to reports coming out of the Middle East. and they're going to do it to prevent the fall of Assad, because Assad's army is starting to crack right now.